Here's Karla. Great.
Very much appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak with you today. At the end of this speak, I'm going to decide whether I am more nervous about doing this talk right now or if it was harder to have somebody videotape me while I was jazzercising. But it was really important to me for people to see that life does go on, because it does. In the next few minutes, I wish to tell you about what early detection really means, my personal journey, and what the YMCA groups meant for me. It started for me in February of 1999 with Dr. Weeks, who is my annual family practitioner person, and she and I were arguing over whether I needed a mammogram because I was only 38 years old. I'd had my baseline at 35, which is what I was supposed to do with the high risk in my family, and I'd had one the year before because I'd had all sorts of lumps over the years and never really worried much about it. And so she said, well, let's do a check. And that's when things started to go downhill. She said, well, what about this one? What about this one? And what about this one? Even then, it was a while before I got too worried. I put my mammogram off for 5 weeks because I was a school person. I waited till spring break. And immediately went into ultrasound. Didn't worry then. Went off to see Dr. Eisenhut. She was a fabulous woman who was the one who told me I had breast cancer. And we went for a needle biopsy that was atypical, which meant we have to wait longer for surgery. That was about 2.5 weeks later, and had what we were hoping to be a lumpectomy, but found out that the 2 lumps over here were really one large tumor, and that a mastectomy was what was needed. On to see Dr. Gordon, the radiation oncologist, fabulous, kind man, and he talked to me about that I could keep this breast and I would be okay with some radiation. On to Dr. Leonard, the plastic surgeon. Loved the man. He said, take them both off, we can build them up, they'll be better, I can make them match. And I actually just finished with him just in January, and I'm thinking that maybe we could do some other kinds of things along the way. Well, I did. I had them both removed in May of 1999. It was a really hard thing to go through. A couple weeks later, I met Dr. Pierce, the oncologist. I don't know how they do it, talking to people all day about cancer and telling them the horrible news. By then, I'd known I had cancer, but I didn't know how bad it was. Dr. Pierce told me I had a 50 to 60% chance of surviving and probably would not survive a reoccurrence. And those are still things that I don't think of very often because they're very difficult to think about. Went back to Dr. Eisenhut, had a central line put in for chemotherapy, and began with chemo in June of that year. Spent the summer in treatment, surrounded by family and friends, and tried to keep life as normal as possible. I have 2 small children. And luckily I did have summers off and actually took the next fall off to get better. Hair fell out right before that 39th birthday. Fall I had radiation. And laying there on the treatment table with no breasts, no hair, is just a reminder that it can't be about how you look. Though if you noticed in the videotape and notice now, I always had my nails done. Group has been there for me every step of the way, and so is my family. My sister Lori's an oncology nurse. How hard for her. She just knew what to say at the right time. My sister Lisa, she can take any situation and turn it to something positive. My dad, he couldn't speak to me for a couple of months. It was really hard for him. My mother's had breast cancer twice. You just take care of business, you just take care of the breast, and you go back to work. And having that no-nonsense attitude from my mother has been fabulous. My daughter was an adolescent. She was in middle school when her mother was bald. I know, but you know what? Not once did she said, Mommy, you can't go looking like that, because I never wore a wig. I wore hats. Wigs looked hot and uncomfortable, and that's just what worked for me. And in my son Andrew, I was able to volunteer in his 3rd grade classroom and had a ball. My husband Jim went to every appointment, changed my bandages, drained my drains, and cared for my central line. I started to go in group July of that year, so right after my hair had fallen off. and that's where I began to meet the first of my friends. We talk about everything. There is nothing that I can think of that we have not discussed. Menopause is a real fun one to talk about. Some of us have been in forced menopause from chemotherapy. Some of us have said estrogen was bad because it caused, or not caused, but it was the food of our cancer. And so we had hysterectomies. Some of us are on tamoxifen, which also causes menopausal hot flashes, or lack of libido, bone loss, and of course, vaginal dryness. Depression, nutrition, alternative treatments, the change in our sexuality. How does it feel now? Those are really hard things to talk about. We also have lots of different speakers. We learn a lot, talk about the newest research, and reconstruction versus prosthetics, and knowing that that's such a personal choice. And in group, if you ever want to come see, we love to show off our new breasts. In group the past year, we've lost 3 people. We've lost Esther. I'd only met her a couple of times, but she was a feisty 80-year-old woman who'd fought breast cancer for a long, long time. She knew when the time came that she would go with dignity, and that's what she did. Patty I met once early on. It was a really, really hard time for me. She had a son that was 16-year-old, and she'd just been diagnosed with a reoccurrence and was not going to survive, and was hoping that she would be able to at least make it through her son's high school graduation. She did come close, but it was very hard to listen to her talk about end-of-life issues, where she was going to be buried, and how it was going to work for her family. Then there was Wendy. Wendy came to group lots. She started probably about 1.5 years ago, and when she was diagnosed, had what someone described as a football-sized tumor in her breast, because she truly believed that if it didn't hurt, it wasn't cancer. She was working 2 jobs in order to get enough insurance, or waiting for her health insurance to kick in so she could go see a doctor. She was diagnosed in the ER when her tumor burst. Wendy told us in group about, we watched her go through chemotherapy, we watched her go through a mastectomy, and when she went in for radiation, the CAT scan showed that her cancer had indeed spread to her liver and to her lungs. And she died not too long after that, but we were there for her when she told us. What some of the group members would like you to know about group and what it means to them, and I'm going to go ahead and read this exactly. Mariana, sharing and understanding what we all went through, and some of us are still going through, sharing our fears, our hopes, our experiences, what the physicians recommend, articles, joys, and tears, understanding that one has to be there in order to understand what we've all shared. Carrie, the support group's been a place of comfort, friendship, wisdom, laughter, and hope. Kathy, although initiation into the Breast Cancer Support Club was tough, it has meant meeting kindred spirits with whom I can share my fears, my losses, and my hot flashes. We listen, counsel, and encourage each other, and there's no shortage of laughs along the way. Thank you, YMCA, for providing guidance and a venue for this exchange. Trudy, the only people with whom I can laugh at my cancer, as well as cry about it and rage at it. We're all getting into and past cancer sisters. And Connie, sometimes I go for me, sometimes I go for those who were in my shoes 6 years ago. When you're diagnosed with breast cancer, you feel entirely alone. No one can know what you're feeling, and then you go to group. Group knows what you're feeling sometimes before you do. It's an anchor in a stormy water.